In other lives there is great strain, but there is also great fusing and accommodating power. In others, great strain with little accommodating power. A life will be successful or not according as the power of accommodation is equal to or unequal to the strain of fusing and adjusting internal and external changes. The trouble is that in the end we shall be driven to admit the unity of the universe so completely as to be compelled to deny that there is either an external or an internal, but must see everything both as external and internal at one and the same time, subject and object, external and internal, being unified as much as everything else. This will knock our whole system over, but then every system has got to be knocked over by something. Much the best way out of this difficulty is to go in for separation between internal and external, subject and object, when we find this convenient, and unity between the same when we find unity convenient. This is illogical, but extremes are alone logical, and they are always absurd. The mean is alone practicable, and it is always illogical. It is faith and not logic which is the supreme arbiter. They say all roads lead to Rome, and all philosophies that I have ever seen lead ultimately either to some gross absurdity, or else to the conclusion already more than once insisted on in these pages, that the just shall live by faith. That is to say that sensible people will get through life by rule of thumb as they may interpret it most conveniently, without asking too many questions for conscience' sake. Take any fact and reason upon it to the bitter end, and it will ere long lead to this as the only refuge from some palpable folly. But to return to my story. When Ernest got to the top of the street and looked back, he saw the grimy, sullen walls of his prison filling up the end of it. He paused for a minute or two. "There," he said to himself, "I was hemmed in by bolts which I could see and touch. Here I am barred by others which are none the less real. Poverty and ignorance of the world. It was no part of my business to try to break the material bolts of iron and escape from prison. But now that I am free I must surely seek to break these others." He had read somewhere of a prisoner who had made his escape by cutting up his bedstead with an iron spoon. He admired and marvelled at the man's mind, but could not even try to imitate him. In the presence of immaterial barriers, however, he was not so easily daunted, and felt as though, even if the bed were iron and the spoon a wooden one, he could find some means of making the wood cut the iron sooner or later. He turned his back upon Eyre Street Hill and walked down Leather Lane to Holborn. Each step he took, each face or object that he knew, helped at once to link him on to the life he had led before his imprisonment, and at the same time to make him feel how completely that imprisonment had cut his life into two parts, the one of which could bear no resemblance to the other. He passed down Fetter Lane into Fleet Street, and so to the Temple, to which I had just returned from my summer holiday. It was about 9:30, and I was having my breakfast, when I heard a timid knock at the door, and opened it to find Ernest. Chapter 70. I had begun to like him on the night Towneley had sent for me, and on the following day I thought he had shaped well. I had liked him also during our interview in prison, and wanted to see more of him, so that I might make up my mind about him. I had lived long enough to know that some men who do great things in the end are not very wise when they are young. Knowing that he would leave prison on the 30th, I had expected him, and as I had a spare bedroom, pressed him to stay with me till he could make up his mind what he would do. Being so much older than he was, I anticipated no trouble in getting my own way, but he would not hear of it. The utmost he would assent to was that he should be my guest till he could find a room for himself, which he would set about doing at once. He was still much agitated, but grew better as he ate a breakfast, not of prison fare, and in a comfortable room. It pleased me to see the delight he took in all about him. The fireplace with the fire in it, the easy chairs, the Times, my cat, the red geraniums in the window, to say nothing of coffee, bread and butter, sausages, marmalade, etc. Everything was pregnant with the most exquisite pleasure to him. The plane trees were full of leaf still. He kept rising from the breakfast table to admire them. Never till now, he said, had he known what the enjoyment of these things really was. He ate, looked, laughed, and cried by turns, with an emotion which I can neither forget nor describe. He told me how his father and mother had lain in wait for him, as he was about to leave prison. I was furious, and applauded him heartily for what he had done. He was very grateful to me for this. Other people, he said, would tell him he ought to think of his father and mother rather than of himself, and it was such a comfort to find someone who saw things as he saw them himself. Even if I had differed from him, I should not have said so, but I was of his opinion, and was almost as much obliged to him for seeing things as I saw them, as he to me for doing the same kind office by himself. Cordially as I disliked Theobald and Christina, I was in such a hopeless minority in the opinion I had formed concerning them, that it was pleasant to find someone who agreed with me. Then there came an awful moment for both of us. A knock, as of a visitor, and not a postman, was heard at my door. "Goodness gracious!" I exclaimed. "Why didn't we sport the oak? Perhaps it is your father, but surely he would hardly come at this time of day. Go at once into my bedroom." I went to the door, and sure enough there were both Theobald and Christina. I could not refuse to let them in, and was obliged to listen to their version of the story, which agreed substantially with Ernest's. Christina cried bitterly. Theobald stormed. After about 10 minutes, during which I assured them that I had not the faintest conception where their son was, I dismissed them both. I saw they looked suspiciously upon the manifest signs that someone was breakfasting with me, and parted from me more or less defiantly, but I got rid of them, and poor Ernest came out again, looking white, frightened, and upset. He had heard voices, but no more, and did not feel sure that the enemy might not be gaining over me. We sported the oak now, and before long he began to recover. After breakfast we discussed the situation. I had taken away his wardrobe and books for Mrs. Jupp's, but had left his furniture, pictures, and piano, giving Mrs. Jupp the use of these, so that she might let her room furnished, in lieu of charge for taking care of the furniture. As soon as Ernest heard that his wardrobe was at hand, he got out a suit of clothes he had had before he had been ordained, and put it on at once, much, as I thought, to the improvement of his personal appearance. Then we went into the subject of his finances. He had had £10 from Pryer only a day or two before he was apprehended, of which between 7 and 8 were in his purse when he entered the prison. This money was restored to him on leaving. He had always paid cash for whatever he bought, so that there was nothing to be deducted for debts. Besides this, he had his clothes, books, and furniture. He could, as I have said, had the £100 from his father if he had chosen to emigrate, but this both Ernest and I, for he brought me round to his opinion, agreed it would be better to decline. This was all he knew of as belonging to him. He said he proposed at once taking an unfurnished top back attic in as quiet a house